Hopefully folks will join in here as they get up and running. So I don't want to keep anyone that's on the call waiting unnecessarily. So.
Here we go. Well, that's fine. We can go ahead and get the meeting started. It won't be a problem at all. And then as people join in, we'll allow them to participate in the meeting. For those who do not know me, I'm Willie Hines. I'm the Associate Director of the City of Milwaukee Housing Authority. We have with us a number of individuals today that will introduce themselves and kind of tell you the role that they're playing in the project and kind of go from there. However, before I get started, I do know that I do want to acknowledge our state representative, Mr. Haywood, who has been a part of the process and attended other meetings, and I do want to welcome and thank him for his participation. And then Alderwoman Cobbs in her office, I want to thank the Alderwoman for her participation in the meeting as well. With that said, as we've always said, and I want to start the meeting out, and we do have some of HACM staff in attendance that will be available as needed. And I do want to thank them for being involved as well. As we've said from the beginning, Hillside is not for sale. I repeat, Hillside is not for sale. However, it is on the move, and we're going to continue to have it on the move. And we've been on the move for many years, doing everything we can to ensure that we're making a significant investment in Hillside Terrace to improve the overall quality of housing for our residents, and more importantly, to preserve. So those are the things that we're seeking to do. It's a period of time as you go through the presentation. It's going to be a facelift that will take a number of years to be completed. But what we are doing, again, is doing everything we can to ensure that our residents in Hillside have outstanding housing as the transformation around them occurs. We want to make certain that people are able to see the transitions that we're occurring in. And what we've done during this process, we had various residents meeting previously, meetings as far back as 2005. And if you slide to kind of give you the timeline by which we have done our activities and meeting with our residents. There was information notices that was issued back in 2017. There was an application for RAD in 2017, and we began obviously in 2015, as you can see, and just began to go all the way through resident input sessions. A number of them we met with our teams, and then there was some input from in a meeting where we are now, just the session 3. And what you will see in the presentation is activities that you engaged in, and more importantly, our consultants' abilities to go back and take what you've said and go ahead and put it in, continue to allow the project to evolve. And so with that, I want to thank you for being in attendance, residents. Again, we're doing this to improve the quality of life and quality of housing stock for you. And so with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Nick, and he can proceed with the presentation.
All right, thanks, Willie. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate everyone who's joining us tonight. I wish that we were able to do this in person. I miss the ability to see all of you that we had back in 2019 and again in February of 2020. I think that it was great to be able to meet so many of you and talk to you face to face. But in the efforts of keeping everyone safe, I think this Zoom call is we'll have to are going to be, and we'll talk about this at the end of the meeting, but we are going to be over the next couple weeks here at 3 different time points. And what we're gonna do is set up a small tent outside of the resource center, so it'll be outdoors. We'll have a lot of the materials that you're about to see here tonight, and we'll be wearing masks. And so if anyone feels safe and comfortable coming down and talking to us in person about the project, we would be happy to do that. We're there 3 different times for a couple hour time chunks. And we tried to spread it throughout the day, morning, afternoon, and evening. All we can work together to keep each other safe. So with that, we'll kind of get into the presentation here. And to start, I'd actually like to look back at how we've discussed this with you over the past year, really. So at our initial meeting, you might remember, we shared a number of precedents throughout the country, and you guys provided a lot of great dialogue and feedback about what you liked and what you didn't like. Tonight is a little bit different because we're on the computer, but we are looking for that feedback from you tonight as well. So what you have to say to us is very important, because that's really our guiding principle, is to try to incorporate everything that you say into the neighborhood as it's built. And so tonight, while we ask that you stay muted, so that we don't hear cars or dogs or kids, there is the ability to, there's a chat function on this program. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, kind of where this bubble is pointing, you'll see a little chat function. And if you could, if you've got questions or comments, please type those in there. We've got Tammy Belton-Davis, who is going to be moderating those questions for us tonight. And we're going to stop at really 10 points throughout the presentation tonight, and open it up to questions that anyone might have about that portion of the presentation. So you don't have to wait till the end of the whole talk to voice your opinions. We're going to be able to do that throughout here. So with that, we'll kind of move forward. So again, back last year, we came to you first and showed you other examples of similar neighborhoods throughout the United States. So these are all have been recently rehabilitated. They're all assisted income neighborhoods throughout the United States, very similar to Hillside. They're located in Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, Maryland. And so we looked at all these different things that they've been able to do as they've gone through a similar process. And we got all your comments, lots of great comments, and a lot of consensus really about several issues that are important to you. And then we came back in February. At the February meeting, you might remember Cheryl, who sort of live sketched as we talked through what we developed were 10 principles really that are going to guide the neighborhood. And so this is what we're going to talk about tonight. You're going to see some initial designs for the neighborhood, and you're going to see how the 10 things that we got out of that first meeting from your comments and your feedback, and then we brought that back to you in February and made sure we were understanding you correctly. You're going to see how those 10 things have really formed the neighborhood and are weaved throughout the neighborhood. And so that's going to be the structure of the evening tonight. We're going to talk about each of these issues and how they're shown throughout the neighborhood. And yeah, we're really excited. I wish we were in person, but I know as a team, we're really excited to show you what we've been working on the last few months and how your thoughts and opinions have impacted that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce it to Carolyn Eswine here. So Carolyn is our urban planner, and this is the neighborhood as it stood in 1920. And Carolyn, if you want to talk a little bit about the changes that have taken place in the neighborhood over time.
Sure. You might not even recognize this as your neighborhood, but this is what it had looked like in between 48 and 1965. So the only thing that's still remaining is the church. And so you'll recognize that from your neighborhood. But there were lots of different streets that were creating opportunities for you to walk through the neighborhood. The gray area is what is defined as Hillside today. So you'll see there are some block patterns. There's the Housing Authority or Redevelopment Authority project to the north. There were some additional developments that were surrounding 6th Street. It's a fairly busy street, as you all know, and we heard from you. These are connectors to downtown and to the east part of downtown. So those are dividers. And then of course the major highway came in and created another division. So you have your own isolated area, which in some cases we heard from residents, they like that they have their own area, but you also are disconnected. And so how can we create connections for you within Hillside? And that was one of the main goals that we had listening to what you asked for.
So this is kind of Hillside as it stands today. And it was really formed by some of those decisions in the mid 20th century that really disconnected it and pushed it off into a corner of the city. It's a neighborhood that's centered around the car and not the person. So it's all about parking lots and streets. And that was evidenced in some of the comments that we heard back from you guys. So this is the neighborhood as it is today. And I think the two comments that really stuck with us the most were one from a resident and one from a teen. It was about what their experiences are in Hillside. So that everyone generally liked Hillside, but they liked the identity of Hillside. They didn't necessarily like the streets and the buildings. One person said, "I would walk around Hillside, but there's nowhere to walk to." And one of the teens said that they don't go anywhere in Hillside because it all looks the same. And so when we initially set about sort of laying out the blocks and the streets in Hillside, we tried to focus on what would it be like to walk around this neighborhood as a person. And so here is the neighborhood kind of as it stands today. And then these are the streets that we are looking to add back in. And Carolyn can provide a little bit of additional comments on why we're locating these where we are.
Sure. The red lines represent the new streets that we are proposing. So you can see they actually reconnect the area and create smaller blocks. And smaller blocks make it more walkable for you and also create more frontages. For many residents, we heard you wanted your own individual your front door. And so the more streets that we have, then the more opportunities we have for those front doors. And also creates a safe neighborhood in terms of having people move through the smaller areas. There aren't any large mid-block sections where you can't see what's going on there, or it doesn't feel safe for you to walk through the neighborhood.
And so, kind of these initial moves, we started to break down the size of the blocks. And then, we've also really kind of re-envisioned the buildings. So to do a lot of the improvements and the amenities and the better streets and connections, we're going to be, kind of increasing the size of the buildings within Hillside. So they're going to be bigger, they're going to be closer together. It's going to feel more like the rest of the city than, right now it feels sort of like a suburban development. And so this is sort of the new map of Hillside. And so it's got, a number of larger buildings on it. You'll see a lot more streets, a lot more trees. It has one thing that was very important to residents was maintaining as many private entrances as we possibly could. So I don't know the number of private entrances in Hillside now, but I believe we're nearly maintaining that or even increasing it. And then lots of public spaces. So there's only over 20 different public spaces throughout the neighborhood that Hillside residents will be able to enjoy with other people or just by themselves. There's a sort of a public areas and then also private areas that will be just for you. And now what we're gonna show you next is sort of, because you know, that's fine, but it's a little hard to read, right? It's looking down at the neighborhood from above. And so what we're gonna show you next is what would the neighborhood look like in 3 dimensions, so 3D. And it's really a diagram though. So the buildings are all gonna look kind of like cartoons. So eventually they're going to look like that. They're going to have real windows and materials and lights and trees. But for tonight's purposes, because we're just in the very initial stages of design, they're going to be diagrams. And so the way I would liken it is what you're going to see tonight is to a building the same way this little stick figure is to a real person. So it's sort of an imitation of the person. It's got all the but you know, I can't tell you what colors hair that person wears, what type of clothes they. It's not to be taken literally. And the buildings have, you'll notice they're different colors. So the different colors that you're going to see tonight have different meanings to them. So the gray is parking, and that's indoor parking, which is usually at the base of the buildings. There's public spaces, which is kind of this orange color. So those are spaces like lobbies or club rooms or rooftop rooms that are shared by all the residents. There's going to be this blue color, and that's the majority of the neighborhood is apartments and units. And then there's going to be yellow stairs and elevators. That's how you get up and down in the building. And you'll notice a lot of stairs surrounding many of these buildings, and those are entrances on the first floor that lead to a unit on the second floor. So it was a way of really increasing the number of private entrances that we had, because we heard that was very important to people. And then lastly, the dark purple, you won't see a lot of that because that's inside the building, but the hallways. And so with that, we're going to dive into the new neighborhood here. And this looks a lot different, right? So really the one thing that's going to be able to orient you here is the church right at the middle of the screen. So that's St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church is there and will remain there. And the whole neighborhood is kind of organized off of that. And so what we're going to do is you're seeing the whole neighborhood right now. So what we're going to do is zoom in and look at each of these 10 principles, these 10 goals that we've kind of developed with you guys earlier in the year. And so the first one is walking paths. So we'll let Carolyn take it from there.
Sure. One thing we heard is that you wanted the opportunity to walk through the neighborhood, but also different experiences. Where would you walk to? Where would you gather? Maybe picnic benches, but also safe lighting. And so we listened to that, showed some examples, and provided a variety of these throughout the neighborhood. So on the next slide, you'll see all those red connections, all those red lines are walking between the blocks. So for orientation, on the right side is 6th Street. Down on the bottom is where Fond du Lac comes into McKinley, right? And then if Nick shows or whoever's operating this, the walking paths really connect all the mid-blocks. And here's what they might look like. They might have opportunities for balconies. There might be a pavilion for you to gather mid-block. There's a lot of landscaping. In some cases on the bottom left, there's that orange block coming out. That might be a community party room that opens out into one of these walking areas. So it's really to create a secondary way to move through the neighborhood and give you lots of little, experiences along the way. So I just want to remind you to, if you have a comment on this, you like it, or you have a question, to use that chat function, and we'll be looking for your feedback along the way.
Yes, if there's any questions at the moment, feel free to, if there's anything you want to say about the walking paths, feel free to type that in, and Tammy will bring those up and we'll talk about them.
I think as we start to move through the drawings, it'll just take a little while to take a look at this and understand how do the buildings meet. And so, for example, you know, sometimes there's a lower element. So I'm just going to circle, like these would be lower units where they would have their own individual entrances opening onto one of these pathways. And then you have all the other apartments in the taller building looking down on the pathways. So there's a lot of eyes on the paths, a lot of people visually seeing what's happening.
Carolyn, there is a question that asks, when does this start?
So this project, you know, I know last time we showed all these ideas, everybody was really excited. It won't start for several, 2-3 years, 2 years hopefully, but it's also phased over 15 to 20 years. So at the end, we're going to be showing you the 5 phases. So we're excited, but it won't happen for quite a while. There's a lot more design details that have to get figured out. So how wide are the pathways? They all vary. Some of these are 20 feet wide, some are up to 40 feet wide. Each of them has a little different character. So enough room to have a couple people walking on the paths past each other, but also not be right in front of somebody's porch or their balcony. There's a little bit of space there as well. Are those dimensions fair, Nick?
Yeah, I think so.
Gordon's probably on here too. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, those are good questions. Yep. And we've been working on this for 6 months, so those are things sometimes we take for granted. Seems like all units will become high-rise. There won't be any single family units. You'll see in one of the phases there are townhomes. The way this is drawn is that these could appear like townhomes. They're shorter, but yes, to accommodate some of the density needed to basically pay for all these different amenities, we have to accommodate those in apartment style units. That was one thing we had talked about early on. I think Willie had explained as well. We want to invest with all these outdoor and indoor new amenities, but we need to have the units that will bring the money in or the increment to pay for that as well. So there's a mix, but you're right. A lot more apartment buildings.
Carolyn, there is a question around the number of units. I know that comes up in the presentation. Do you want to share now or wait?
I can talk to that a little bit now. So the question is, how many units will be in one building? It's a hard question to answer because there's a lot of different types of buildings. So there are some high rises, you know, similar to the tower that's there now. There are also going to be some townhomes and also some apartment buildings. In the image on the left here, you've got townhomes that are attached to the apartment building, so they can take advantage of the indoor parking. So it's there isn't even giving an average wouldn't be fair because there's so many different types. So we'll talk about how many units are in the neighborhood and in each phase in a little bit here.
So another element we heard from you is you wanted a place to gather. You wanted a place to gather
Hello?
with your neighbors. Yes? Do you have a question? Is that Carrie? Okay. As well as for when we talked with the teens, they wanted a place to throw a football and hang out with their friends. So there's a lot of different ways that we are including outdoor gathering. Again, different, in that first diagram we showed, there's over 20 different outdoor public spaces, and they all vary in size and scale and the purpose. But I think that's a number that's really important to understand. When we talked to our teen group, they said there's one park right now, and they were really excited to have a couple more places that they could go hang out or play some recreation. So we have all of these highlighted here in green, and it was also very important to have them distributed throughout the neighborhood, so everybody has public space within walking distance to where they live. And the ones highlighted here are all accessible at the ground level. You'll see in a little bit later, there are some that are only accessible to people living in particular buildings. So we can see some of the images for this. So one that we're excited about is the image on the left in front of the church. This would be the largest gathering place. So the space has a pavilion you can see here. You might have block parties there, you might have a concert, you might have different events. The space in front of that is large enough that you could kick a ball around, you could gather, or you could bring your chairs and blankets for an event. You also have the space in front of the church that has some play equipment for children. So there's an opportunity for that as well. And then the top right, one other element we're looking at is a bridge that would connect the brewery development with Hillside. And this would be a very large gathering space. You would have great views of downtown. This one is not designed yet, but we know that it could accommodate a variety of different activities, places to hang out. And then the bottom right is showing, in some areas we have a outdoor grilling station where you might gather with some of either your family or your neighbors. And those are located within those pathways that we had shown earlier. So, questions, will there be a better safety patrol? I guess that is not something I can answer. If Willie wanted to answer that. Safety, I believe there would be the safety vehicles and staff walking or driving through the neighborhood. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, we do recognize safety as an issue, and as we integrate programming, I do know that by having additional eyes on task, more people, we will work also to integrate a greater level of safety issues that were built into the project. As it pertains to public safety and visible staff, it's too early to say that we would be able to increase the number, but safety is definitely an item that was taken into consideration when laying out the plans, and will continue to be a part of it as we continue to develop.
Yeah, the design takes safety into consideration in all aspects so that you have eyes and people looking down at the spaces. So the image on the left, we're talking about different building sizes. There's a smaller apartment building that is viewing the public space, then the large tower is actually immediately behind it. And some of those have the roof spaces that are public as well. So, this is an outdoor opportunity that Nick will focus on later, where you'd have great views of the neighborhood and downtown. So there's different ways to think about gathering and the public spaces. So I'm going to pause because I see there's more questions coming in.
So there is someone, Carolyn and Nick, who also just put a note into the chat, Moto E6. So will the people that already live in the building still live during construction or have an option to choose? Or will you guys choose for us? And then I'll go back to Fedora's question next.
Nick, we aren't choosing for you.
We will definitely not choose for you. So at the end, we're going to look at how the project is phased. It has 5 different phases, and they happen over 20 years. So if you're not in the first phase, you would have the ability, ideally, to move from your unit now into a new unit.
The goal is to have the least amount of disruption so that we're building units while you can live there in your area, and then choose when you move into which section. Because as we walk through this neighborhood, you'll see there's lots of different characters, and they feel a little bit different.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different types of buildings. There's going to be a bunch of different types of units, and so there may be units that you like and units you don't like, and so there's going to be more variety than there is right now.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next.
Yep. The follow-up question has to do with safety. So more accessibility to the community. How safe will people expect what is the safety implications around that?
Yeah, I think, increased traffic and increased pedestrians and eyes looking out of buildings, that really contributes to safety. So it's when you have, the areas at Hillside right now where, a car might not drive by for 5-10 minutes at a time. It's those sort of back of building areas that become less safe because there's no one watching them, there's no one monitoring them. And so by having all these new streets in here and connecting back into the city, there should be, it should feel more like the rest of the city, and should, there should be sort of, I am my brother's keeper aspect to it, where we're all kind of like looking out for each other.
I think lighting is another element. The lighting that's in Hillside now is probably a little bit dated, feels a little bit darker. So every public space would have some type of lighting. And with all the units that we have facing the streets, you would have light washing out of the units onto the streets. And with more streets, you're going to have, again, more street lighting. So I just really want to emphasize that the lighting, this will feel very different at night with all the additional lighting than maybe you have now, or at least what we're hearing from people that are walking through saying it's a little bit dark. So that's another aspect.
So another question is coming to the chat, and that is, the outside sounds great. What are some of the upgrades inside, especially for those that have children?
Sure. So tonight's going to be primarily focused on the outside because this is really about the design of the neighborhood. But each building as it's built is going to have interior amenities, and we will talk about that a little bit later in the program here.
Let's keep moving. I did see the comment. Yeah, we all wish this would happen sooner. It all depends on the market, right? So if the market supports it, this could happen faster than 15, 20 years, but this is a large project. So safe play was one of those we heard really clearly from those with young children. And we also heard it from some of the youth that were at our earlier meetings in December and February. Wanted a place that they felt comfortable, that was really for them. And that's sort of an exciting element to think about. So we have public play areas for children that are accessible to everybody in the neighborhood. And as I mentioned, there are some areas where it's only accessible to those within a particular building. Do you want to move to the next one? And then we can touch on funding a little bit. Right? So here we're highlighting the playgrounds. So everything in yellow is a playground.
Must be a little lag there.
There is probably, when I'm seeing it, maybe when everybody else is seeing it. So you can see, again, these are distributed throughout the neighborhood. And so there are a couple. So, this one, would be associated with the building, but it's along a walkway, so you would have access to it. And every other one that we're showing is accessible to everybody in the neighborhood, not just people that are in that particular building. So yeah, if we go to the next image, you'll see some different examples, and there's different equipment based on different age groups, wanting it to be fun. And it's along some of those walkways, as we mentioned. There's one in front of the church that would have some play equipment. And then you can see this is one of the mid-block walkways, and over here would be a children's playground associated with an adjacent, outdoor gathering area for older, teens or adults or the parents. And then on the left, there would be individual entrances coming out. So again, very accessible. People can sit out on their balcony and watch these spaces and watch what's happening, as well as the lighting. And the bottom right is just showing, again, just some additional spaces where we have a place to run around. We're just open lawn. We did hear from some of the youth that they sometimes wanted places just to run around, throw a ball around, in addition to the play equipment. Willie, do you want to talk about funding? There's a question, who's paying for it, right?
Could you read the question?
So the question is, are these donations or city funding?
The funding, first, well, the development in and of itself will be contingent upon our ability to secure funding. A part of the funding, as we talked about, the RAD, which is a program that the federal government has provided. There's LITEC, which is state tax credit that we've been able to secure in previous projects. We've had some other bonding and other stuff to finance the project. We have received some in-kind support from the city in previous times, and so we're hopeful that we've gotten some from various financial organizations and institutions, First Home Loan Bank and things as such. And so we're going to continue to explore those possible options. But again, at this point in time, it's kind of too premature to determine where that funding by itself will come from. There may very well be some additional resources that may be available even in the future. But right now, we're looking at all areas from the state to the federal government to the city to even philanthropists, banks, and financial institutions as well.
Carolyn and Nick, before you go back in, I have 2 additional questions that didn't come through the chat, but related to safety. And that is, will there be cameras, and will there be consulting with Milwaukee Police Department for the safety by environmental design plan?
I don't know about cameras. I guess I would defer to the housing authority on that, but absolutely in a project this scale, we would be talking to the police department and again, the internal security group. So all that would be part of the discussion as this moves forward in more detailed design.
Mm-hmm. We've had cameras at our development sites, and when we've done projects as such, we've always submitted RFPs and put dollars towards the camera when there are resources available. And so cameras clearly have been a part of how we patrol and provide a safe neighborhood and safe communities. And as we look to do activities here at Hillside, we definitely would consider cameras as well. Building on what we already had there, obviously is not as many as we'd like, but ideally it'd give us an opportunity to build and get any more and secure even more.
Okay.
Okay, you want to move on? Outdoor sports, we heard an interest in managing, again, how much space we need. We're not going to have a massive football field, right? But we do have a couple spaces for basketball. And hearing from the youth and the teens, you know, we have a couple full courts, but it's really about the half court experience. And then how could you have other activities within those spaces as well? And opportunity for people to watch as well. So the parents watching throughout. So everything identified in orange is an outdoor recreation space. The top one is just more of an open lawn area. The one in the middle on the left is basketball. And then there's another basketball one closer to 6th Street where it has a little bit more of an enclosure. It's not as wide open to the street, so that could be closed at night if you wanted to only have it open during certain hours. And then down in front of the church again, as I mentioned, that one is a larger area that you could do maybe a U9 or younger U8 soccer pickup or just kicking a ball around. And we'll see what some of these will look like. And so I think what's exciting is that we heard a lot of support from both parents and the youth of having these types of spaces and keeping people active, having different after school programs, summer programs. And so the image on the left, we would have the large community center is the building in orange, and then where the basketball courts, these are basketball courts here, doing the 2 half courts, but you could combine them and do a combined activity. And then this is more on the northwestern side of the neighborhood. Here's an internal large green space that can accommodate the half court and the The top one is, again, more open, just for throwing a ball around or running around. We did hear a desire to have that as well. You can see all of these have people watching the space as well. So I think that's a safety element that we took into consideration.
Yeah, and so this is talking about outdoor sports, but I think this might be a good point to talk about indoor sports as well. So we do, on the image on the left here, it's 6th Street kind of on the far side of that image, and you'll see that big orange colored building. So that is an indoor recreation facility. So the idea when we were working through this was that was going to be the home of the Boys and Girls Club. I know in recent weeks that they've made a decision to stop services at Hillside temporarily, but I think we're committed to kind of maintaining some type of resource like that here, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club, which would be great if they came back in, or maybe it's a different organization that is able to come in and fill that. So I know that from talking to residents in December and February, that was the Boys and Girls Club and the Resource Center were the two most important things in the neighborhood to people. And so to preserve both of those uses, I think is absolutely essential in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Are there any questions on outdoor sports areas before we move on?
Just a couple comments.
Mm-hmm.
One is, it seemed like there's a lot going on outside and that they really love the safe haven for children. But there was a preceding question around, are there schools?
No, there are no schools. There would be after-school program spaces such as the community center and potentially new partners that we might have, but no schools. I don't know, Will, if you wanted to address that as a use. There are other uses that we're looking at along 6th Street, but they would be more commercial uses. So there would be hopefully a small grocery or coffee shop or other services that would serve everybody's daily needs. Yeah, we would not have that relationship with MPS. So this is a housing focused project.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is correct. It's more about housing and it's been a little nifty to try to get, it's been challenging to be able to get schools within a development throughout the country, public housing. And we were very innovative and creative 30 years ago, about 25 or 30 years ago at Cyber School at Park One. But since then, we've not been able to, HUD doesn't fund those types of activities. And as we move towards different funding mechanisms, we've not really been able to find any resources. And so again, this really is a housing-driven development.
And I understand with Golden Meyer, a couple blocks away, there are different programs that could occur, and it really comes down to innovative ways to have partnerships, but not actually have a school building. So, okay.
Okay.
What do we have next?
Enjoyable
waiting. Yes. One thing we learned is that if it's raining, you are getting wet while you are waiting for the bus, and especially if you're in a wheelchair, that isn't really good for your equipment or you. So we are looking at different ways to have benches and shelters proposed, and you can be a creative element, could be inclusion of public art. I know on Villard, they have their own graphics for their bus stops, and absolutely, yes, more lighting. So there's a safety element with it. The image in the middle here is at Westlawn. They actually have a little library as part of one of their bus stops. That is something, I guess, that could be explored, although at this point we were focused on the shelters. I'm gonna go to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, am I having a lag? Are you ready there?
Might be.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's all the band,
I'll
right?
try to anticipate better.
So this one, we're highlighting the parking and drop-off. So on 6th Street on the right, where the red lines are, that's where there are parking stalls on either side that would create a buffer between you as a pedestrian and the traffic that's moving a little faster on 6th Street. The purple lines you're seeing everywhere, we do anticipate having on-street parking on the majority of the streets. Sometimes it's only on one side if we didn't have enough width to have it on both sides. And then those little blue and green dots are where you might have drop off and pick up, whether you're getting picked up yourself from a taxi or Uber, or you're having deliveries. So one thing we have to think about is all the different deliveries, whether it's an Amazon or UPS, right? So we are accommodating those as well. So there's a lot, and there's all the underground parking that's accommodated as well. And safe crossing on 6th Street has been raised several times, as right now maybe there's not as many reasons to walk over to the Haymarket neighborhood, but there will be, especially with the new public museum coming at 6th and McKinley. That's exciting. So we've looked at different designs for narrowing the street, for creating bike lanes, still maintaining the parking in the median, but more landscaping, calling more attention to that. We are working with Public Works on some of the design elements for this. I think my last slide, is it coming up? Right?
Here's a view kind of looking
Yes, right.
down 6th Street.
I think this is also an interesting view for you to understand the scale along 6th Street. We have a lot more density. We have our taller buildings along 6th Street where there's the majority of the traffic. And as you move further into the neighborhood, it has a lower height. There are not as many stories. And then obviously the tower you can see at the very south end, so anchors the neighborhood there. So we have some bike lanes we've integrated on 6th Street. Here's another example where we have units, the townhome units, where they have their own individual entrances. There's a green roof behind them in this section. And then the tower, and as you can see, the entrance where your current, the resource center is, that's this orange building. We envision that again to be a very public, accessible building with a lot of programming for the neighborhood. We're excited about that. I think that's a great entrance into the neighborhood off of 6th Street. Were there a
Yep,
few
they got
questions?
2 more here. If you want to talk about the street makeup, and then we'll answer some questions.
And this one shows a little bit of the breakdown that we are suggesting for how 6th Street could be divided. We want to slow the traffic a little bit, so we would narrow the traffic lanes a little bit, although we'd still keep 2 in either direction. You have your median with more landscaping, and then what's key here is there's a bike lane right now. So we would retain that, and we do have another design concept where we actually put the bike lane next to the curb, so you are completely separated from the cars into a little bit more of a safe route that the city is looking at for some of their projects. Just a really great entrance into the neighborhood from 6th Street. I believe this will be the one with the other bike lanes. So this one has the bike lane right along the curb, and then you park out here and then travel. So as you're biking, you're coming all the way down this section here. So you are buffered from where the cars are driving a little bit faster. And then we have these, what we call bump outs here. So it shortens the distance that you're walking across 6th Street and slows cars down when they see the curb bumped into what would typically be your parking lane. So we're working through all those details. This is a concept right now as we talk with Public Works. So we think this will be an improvement for 6th Street.
Are there any questions before we move on, Tammy?
There are. So there's a question about projecting the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, it will be a lot of money. We're rebuilding 9, 12 square blocks of the city. And so it's it'll take a lot of effort from the city and the federal government, and it's also something that's stretched out over 20 years. So it's hard to say kind of what is this going to cost today. When there's going to be electricians on site in 20 years from now putting the last light switches in. So it will have a cost to it, but it will be spread out over time.
So Nick, maybe talk a little bit about timeline again, just because there's a question of what will be happening in the next 2 to 3 years.
Sure. So the next 2 to 3 years, really nothing's going to happen on the site. It's going to be, we still have a lot more work to do from a design standpoint. And then in the first phase, all the first buildings still have to be designed. So no one's even, other than the little boxes that you are seeing here tonight, no one's put any thought into them. So they've got to be, everything's got to be figured out as far as what the units look like and all of that. So it's mostly over the next 2 years would be design and engineering, and then construction would start following that.
Okay. And then there's a question around rent. Will residents see an increase in rent?
I will let Willie handle that one. Are you still there?
Well, in
Willie?
terms of rent, again, there will be an element of different types of funding mechanisms. And what we've been able to do at our other development is to have rent at 30% of income, which is generally meaning that it would, for even at our other locations, 95% of the residents, maybe even 96, rent wouldn't be impacted. And so for the most part, while you will end up paying 30% of your income, it will parallel what you're currently paying now. I mean, obviously 10, 15, 20 years from now, I would say proportionately 30%, which means 30% of whatever your income is today would be still 30% of what your income is 15, 20, 30 years from now as well, based upon those funding mechanisms and based upon what we're doing currently at other locations. So for the most part, 95, 96% of our residents' rent will not be impacted.
Any other questions? Okay, I saw one from Modo E6 asking about whether this is all happening because we're closer to the downtown and have to keep up with the Joneses, or is this for the people and their families? I think I would answer that by saying it's both. So at the base level of this, it is for Hillside residents and their families, and we want to preserve housing on the site. We want to preserve all the housing on the site, and we want it to be good, safe, clean housing for you. And I think you don't have to look very far to see the neighborhood changing around you. And just a couple weeks ago, it was announced that the Milwaukee Public Museum is going to be moving to Hillside, essentially. And so, one thought of this is we need to plan for what Hillside is going to be, because if we don't plan, the lack of a plan is still a plan. And so, it's very important to try and preserve, do what we can now to preserve the residents and the ability to have housing there for everyone. So I think, at the base level of this, again, it's really families and kids and people. So
yeah, and if I may, Hillside was built in 1940, I'm sorry, 19 in the 1940s, 1950s,
Mhm.
right? So the reality is that the infrastructure is crumbling, and the cost to maintain it, many of the systems are obsolete and old and aged. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a boatload of money coming from anywhere that says, okay, let's let's preserve it right now as is. It just wouldn't be cost efficient to do it. We have tens of millions of dollars worth of foundational and structural work that could be used to sustain it and even have an extended life. But in terms of the development, we've put significant resources in it to preserve it, to provide as best of a quality of life we can for residents. But with each passing year, it gets that much more challenging. And we're doing everything we can to make certain that health and safety and the wellness of our residents are maintained. But again, the balance between what's happening around you really is a good opportunity to do it at a very good cost rate. But the issue really is, it's challenging to maintain what currently is there.
Okay.
So there's a question, Willie, is there something we can do to make this go faster? I really think that depends on the market, correct? And funding.
It's going to be driven by funding sources and market. There are some resources that come right away. And that's what I mean by different developments. We've had to phase it. So if they look at Silver Spring and West Lawn, we couldn't do West Lawn in its entirety as well. And it's been a process that's been maybe 15 years or so. And so it has been driven by available resources as well. If there's some dollars that become available, we can accelerate it. And we'll welcome the opportunity to do that.
Okay. The next thing that we looked at was the entrances into the buildings. So when you get off these beautiful streets, how do you get into the buildings? And one thing that we heard was sort of being able to control the entrances. Safety and security is a very important thing. So we developed this concept of a courtyard garden where there would be controlled access into an outdoor space. And then from the outdoor space, you'd get into the building. So it's sort of this extra layer of security at the shared entrances to buildings. And so you'll see sort of the shared entrances and their entrance gardens in the orange and the purple. But then something we heard really loud and clear from a lot of people at all of our meetings were the importance of having private entrances. So people liked being able to walk off the street into their own unit and be home. And so we've done everything we can to provide as many walk-up entrances throughout the neighborhood. So this neighborhood's actually going to feel much different than other areas in the city where you don't have all these doors out onto the street. So some of these are doors off the first, into the first floor, and others are doors that lead to a stair up to a second floor unit. So even though you're on the second floor, you still would have your own private entrance off of the street. And so then this is how that might look in the neighborhood. On the left, you see sort of a more traditional apartment building with a little recessed garden area in the middle of the building. And then on the right, you see these yellow rectangles. Those are stairs that would take you up to the second floor, or a door that would take you into your unit on the first floor. So it's a way of getting both the first and second floor get private entrances onto the street. So any questions on that?
So there is a question in the chat that is talking about who is over all of the housing buildings. And I'm not certain. It says, if so, is it first come, first serve? So Willie, this may be for you.
Can you repeat the question? It was hard to understand.
Yeah. There's a question about who has authority over Hillside, and if the housing buildings, at least how I'm reading it, is it based on first come, first serve?
Well, the real estate and property is owned by HUD and with the partnership with the City of Milwaukee Housing Authority and the City of Milwaukee. And as it pertains to persons living there or in the future for development, it would be the existing residents first, of course, and then it would be applications and various waiting lists or applications that we would have if residents chose not to stay there, and as we exceed the number of units that will no longer accommodate our residents. So it will be an application process.
There is an additional question in the chat about square footage for each unit. You can talk about 1 bedroom to 3 bedrooms.
Sure. There will be 1 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms throughout the neighborhood. It's a little hard to say how big they're going to be or how many there will be of each, because that could change over the next 20 years. So it's, it's sort of this is the map for the trip we want to take, but the route might change here and there. And so we haven't really figured out the different sizes of the units yet.
But they're a mix of 1, 2, 3 bedroom units. I know Hillside now has 4 and 5, but I think the interest from residents has been on the 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an additional question as a follow-up to, is the housing, I'm paraphrasing, so make sure if I have your question incorrect that you let me know in the chat. I am assuming that this is a follow-up to all of the units that are being proposed. What is the application process? So I don't know if Willie didn't respond to that, if you can put it back in the chat to make sure that I've articulated your question well.
Well, again, our first commitment will be to our existing residents. For those that are currently living in Hillside that want to continue to be a part of the new development. At some locations, residents didn't want to, so we allowed them to opt out. We accommodated them. But for those who want to stay, we will work with them, and they will be the first residents that will have opportunity to those new developments, number one. Secondarily, anything after that would be generally driven by the location's waiting list and not a general waiting list. But again, a lot of that those variables and particulars will be driven by the funding source and how that operates. But again, we do anticipate that there would be an application process for those parties that would be interested, and possibility of even having names before the construction is complete, which then allows for a waiting list to be established. But again, the primary and the first person that will have access to these new developments will be the Hillside residents themselves.
Thank you, Willie. I think there's a couple questions again around size. So the first is, what is the size of units in phase 1? And then second question is in the chat, and that is, will the units be smaller than they are now, or guarantee that they'll be the same size now or larger?
Again, I think how Nick can speak to this even further, Carolyn, but it's a little too early to talk about the square footage. There will be continued dialogue with our residents at Hillside, and just as we've taken into consideration their interests and their concerns, as difficult as it was to get what all we heard into the exterior, That's what we're doing, looking at the outside gathering, the walk track, the safe place, the building, the crossing, the outdoor activities. And so we're focusing on the we're focusing on the exterior. But we're going to continue to listen to our residents. And as we continue to listen to them, we will take into consideration what they say and try to meet those requests. So right now it's too premature and too early to talk about what the square footage of those unit sizes will be. But we will listen as we begin to move towards what do we really want to see in the inner court? What do they want the units to look like and square footage and things as such? And again, that's the process that we're involved in. And I anticipate that as we do the charrette and sessions, we'll find that out first go round. And as we continue to transform the footprint, there will be continued dialogue and ongoing dialogue with residents as we move it forward.
There's an additional question in the chat. I'm sorry, go ahead, Willie.
No, I'm fine. I didn't say anything.
Oh. So the question is this also for people who are not in the housing program?
Is it what?
Is this development for people who are not currently in the housing program?
Well, first we have those who are Hillside residents. So this is for Hillside residents, but we also know that we will be building more units on that footprint. So it will be for Hillside residents, any of our other public housing residents that would be interested, and then the broader community as well, because we couldn't do it. We have to do it in partnership with the broader community. So others will have access to possibly live there if they choose to submit the application as well.
Okay. Moving ahead here, another thing that we heard from almost everyone, and even the teens, was the trash in Hillside needs to be protected better. So right now it gets the dumpsters get blown open, raccoons and possums get in there and kind of spread things all over the neighborhood. And so rats, yes, we've heard about the rats. And so really the trash needs to be brought into a controlled room. And so in each of these buildings, there would be a dedicated room in the parking area for the recycling and the trash. And then that would be picked up, on a weekly or biweekly basis by the waste management company. So no longer are you going to have, you're not going to be going outside in the winter to throw trash into a garbage can, only have it to have it blow over in the snowstorm and spread all over the street and the gutter. So it's not a very exciting thing to incorporate into the neighborhood, but I think from what we heard, it's very necessary. And so this next diagram is really just all the indoor trash rooms throughout the whole neighborhood. And so this also kind of serves as a diagram to show you where garage entrances would be. So we talked about street parking a little earlier in the presentation, but there would also be indoor parking under a lot of these buildings. So just to be able to, right now you've got Hillside's almost equal sized parking lots to equal sized buildings, and this is going to be much more building in the neighborhood, so we've got to tuck the parking underneath those buildings. So do we have any questions on trash before we move ahead?
No questions on trash. We're going back to size of units, any 4 to 5 bedroom units available.
I believe that those are, we're looking at 1 to 3 bedroom units here. So I believe the 5 bedrooms may be located off-site somewhere. Willie can speak to that more if he's got additional info on that.
Willie, you're muted if you're talking. He's unmuted now. I think the other question I saw was the pet policy, because I know we heard from the
Oh,
teams
I'm sorry.
that they had.
I was
Okay.
I was doubly muted. Here we go. I apologize. I was muted on my phone and I was muted in the Outlook, or in the video chat. As it pertains to the 4 bedrooms and the 5 bedrooms, or as we redevelop any particular development, what we have to be mindful of is the sin of the generations before us that stockpiled families on top of each other in tight quarters in a development that wasn't compatible. They didn't care. They were just putting a whole bunch of poor people in one area. So what we wanted to do is we didn't want to repeat those sins. We didn't want to repeat the poor policies of yesteryear. But we also wanted to provide quality housing for our residents, to include our 4 and 5 bedrooms. And what's the best place for them to be? We all know that it's best to have kids and family in single-family homes, right? And so a part of the development, we have single-family developments, and we anticipate that the 4 and 5 bedroom units, based upon if those are even needs in the future, that we will have those options available for our residents to put them in what traditional large family settings are. You're not in an apartment development with no room to play or enjoy. We don't believe in that practice. So as we've transformed our developments, we've also tried to integrate housing as an option off-site on occasion. And then if I'm on-site, but off-site is really what we've done most of the time. And this will be no differently. We will make certain that our families that are that would need a 4 and 5 bedroom, which has shrunk, and the requests and demands have decreased over the years. Family sizes are smaller, but we still recognize that there will be some large families, and we want to continue to serve them as well. But we want to serve them much, much better than what the forefathers had in mind relative to what their needs would be. And we're just of the opinion that larger families are better suited for our single-family development.
Willie, can you also speak to the pets policy?
Again, those are, the pet, that's far into the process, but as we've done developments before, we've had to recognize the pet policies that allow for pets in some cases, depending upon the circumstance and the situation, and not for other cases. But again, we will have that dialogue conversation as the process moves forward. And a lot of it is driven by either the investors, the development, and what type of structure is being proposed at that point in time. Well, sometimes it can vary, but we definitely have some that we do deal with and tackle head on. And in some cases, it's worked. And we've said yes. In other cases, we've said no. And then you have to have the special accommodation where we will definitely accommodate.
And then Nick or Carolyn, do you want to address the safety of the parking structure?
Sure. So the parking structures will have a garage door on them. So the only people, able to get into those garages will be the people that live in that building. So in a way, they're safer than the parking lots that are there now, where just anyone in the city can walk into those lots at the moment. I imagine there'll be cameras incorporated into the garages, and it's a pattern. It's something that you see in other apartments, 5-6 blocks east of here. So it's something that's done in apartments now, and they have managed to keep those safe. So. Okay. So going down from the basement of the building all the way to the rooftop, one thing that we talked a lot about with the teens was the ability to get up on the roof and get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. So these would be spaces on a number of the buildings that would have a public room up on the roof, as well as area to get out and get some fresh air, take in views of the city, and get away from the chaos of your day-to-day life. And so this next diagram here shows all of the rooftop rooms in sort of the red color, and then the rooftop terraces in the dark color. So those are spaces that you can walk out onto and view the surrounding city, and then green roofs. So the buildings in this design are all different heights. So some of them are going to be taller than others, and so the people in the tall buildings, we're going to kind of clean up and plant gardens and vegetation on the lower roofs, so that you're looking at something beautiful and not something, not just a roof. So here's
and these are accessible only to the residents in that building. I think that's another thing we also heard.
Yeah, so this, each building would kind of have its own little oasis in the sky, and so you'd be able to look back towards the city or out at the surrounding buildings. So these are some of the views that could be achieved from the buildings in the design. Any comments about hanging out up on the roof before we move on? I'll wait in case anyone's typing. Okay. And then here we are at indoor gatherings. So this is something that we had a question on earlier. So we recognize that, most of this presentation tonight is about the outside and the streets and the sidewalks. And that's really a function of where we're at in the process. So you have to start from the largest look at it and get smaller and smaller and smaller. But there is a recognition that inside the buildings, we need to be providing, just as many amenities and fun things for kids and residents to do as there are outside. And so, in each building, there'll be rooftop spaces. There'll also be sort of these community room spaces. If they can, as in the diagram here, if they can kind of spill out into an outdoor space, so you can host bigger events in the nicer weather. I think that's something to certainly be achieved as well. And so the last two slides here that you're going to see are sort of the neighborhood. Everything's been kind of turned to black and white, except for all of the public spaces. So these would be rooms that are open to residents to use. You'll see the big, on the right-hand side of your screen, the big orange box, that's the new resource center and activity space. And then each building, as you can see, kind of has this little public component. So what those are is going to vary by building. So some might be community spaces for yoga and cooking. Others might be indoor play areas for kids. So it's really going to be kind of a mix throughout the neighborhood. And then this is another view of the neighborhood, because you don't necessarily see all of them. Some of them are, located down on the first floor, and you didn't see them from the other view. So this view is looking back across the neighborhood towards downtown with all of the interior indoor public spaces.
Yeah, that's a good one to highlight the townhomes, because I think we've had some questions. There's townhomes here. Mm-hmm. You can see townhomes here. You have the lower units here. So there are different housing types throughout.
Yeah, in general, they're always connected to a larger apartment building, just so the people in the townhomes can use the indoor parking. But the ones right here in the foreground, those are more standalone. And so with that, we're going to jump back. Well, I guess, are there any questions before we move further ahead? That was sort of the 10th item here. So with that, we're going to move back into kind of a map of the neighborhood. Now that you've seen it in 3D, maybe the map makes a little bit more sense. And I think what we should do now is let's talk about, there's been a lot of questions about how soon is this going to happen? How long is this going to take? And so that really feeds into a discussion about phasing. So this is the Hillside neighborhood. And you'll see, to orient yourself, Interstate 43 on the left-hand side, Fond du Lac Avenue on the bottom of your screen, where we'll be bridging across to the Brewery District. And then, so this breaks down the neighborhood into 5 different parts. So the idea is we would start at the lowest section, down near Fond du Lac and 6th Street. Then we would work our way north, uphill. And then the third phase would be back by the Leinenkugel's Brewery. And then we would sort of work our way out to the west, or to the east, excuse me, towards 6th Street. So the idea is that, you're always kind of backing out of the site, so that once you move into your new apartment, the construction is kind of behind you, and you're not going to have to deal with it on a daily basis, but it's going to be happening sort of in that next section. And so this is sort of the proposed hillside next to the existing hillside. And so you can kind of see how these 5 phases on these 2 different maps work out. So, the first phase kind of down here to the south, and then sort of working your way out of the neighborhood. So I imagine this is gonna stimulate some questions. So I think we'll pause here, and then if anyone's got questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Do you want to reiterate when this would start? Because again, it's 2 to 3 years or more design work
Right.
before there's any construction.
Yep. Yeah, it would start in about 2 to 3 years with more design. And then the construction on each phase is about 4 years. So every 4 years, ideally, if the funding and the demand is there, every 4 years, a new phase would happen.
I think they probably asked all the questions previously.
Okay.
Now we're confirming, right?
Okay. Well, I don't want to.
Are there any other just general questions that you might have? It doesn't have to be about phasing or timing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've tried to answer all the questions that were posted. I think we still have quite a few people on the call. If not, just can talk about the next.
Yeah. Well,
and how do you have the office hours that you'll be talking about?
Yeah. So next steps here are, this was looking back at what has happened and kind of moving forward. So we're right here at resident input session 3, and over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be holding office hours down at the resource center. So I will be outside at a folding table on a folding chair with all of this material. And if you would like to come down and you feel safe coming down and talking in person, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm very interested in thoughts that anyone has about this. And so look at the center of your screen here. office hours are going to be tomorrow from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be out there again on Thursday, September 24th from 11 to 1 to catch a morning crowd. And then on Tuesday, September 29th from 5 to 7. So if you work during the day and are unable to get down there, come down on Tuesday night and we'd be happy to talk to you. Again, we're going to be outside and we'll have masks on. We'd ask that you would wear them as well to keep us safe, and we'll try to keep you safe. But would be, I miss the face-to-face. This is fine talking to you on the computer, but I would much prefer to talk to people in person. So if you feel comfortable coming down, I'd really appreciate meeting with you.
So then we'll take that feedback and we'll make revisions to the design. We have met with a variety of partners that are around Hillside, so we are sharing these ideas with them so they are aware. And I know on the last slide, there's, if they wanted to call, or there's the website, right? For more
That's correct.
information.
Yep.
Right.
So this has been the website and the email and the phone number all along. It remains so. So if you've got questions, comments, really anything that you'd like to do to follow up on tonight's meeting, please reach out in one of these ways, or come down over the next couple of weeks and talk to me. We have also recorded this presentation tonight, and so that's going to be made available. So if someone that wanted to be here tonight and wasn't able to be here, this will be up online in the next couple of days for them to participate in, and so the information can be shared with them as well.
Any final comments, Willie?
Yes, May. Let me first thank the residents for their willingness to participate, not only in the previous sessions, but obviously this one as well. The elected who's also been engaged and participating, we appreciate them as well. Again, as we said from the very, very beginning, Hillside is not for sale, but we are very much committed to doing everything we can to preserve affordable housing in the neighborhood and to provide high quality housing for our residents. That's something that our executive director, Mr. Perez, takes tremendous pride in. And so that is what we're doing. And it's a project that it's not rushed at all. Obviously, it's something that's going to take phases of development, but we're going to do it as efficiently and as mindful of the residents as we're moving forward. Everything, as you've indicated, as you've been able to see in the presentation, it's not easy being able to try to put in everything that residents have asked for, said that they wanted. But I think if by looking at this presentation, you can see that our consultants and our staff, we've done the greatest job we possibly can to try to listen to what you've asked for, listen to what you said, and to integrate it into the process. As we said from the beginning as well, whatever happens, we will always bring it back to you, the resident. This is your neighborhood. This is a resident-driven project, and hopeful that you're able to see what you shared with us has been integrated into the project. And again, we were available to you, and as Nick has indicated, they will be out there, and some Hackam staff will also be there too, just to listen. And to continue to take notes and make modifications as we can. And then there's phone numbers and there's emails, ways of communicating us, texting us. So take advantage of those tools. We want to hear you. Again, we appreciate you taking time out of your evening, your schedule tonight, to listen to what we're doing on your behalf. And so with that, I want to thank you, Nick. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Gigi, for coming out. We appreciate your attentiveness to all the great activities that we anticipate doing down in Hillside. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie, and thanks to everyone for spending tonight with us. Your feedback helps to strengthen the project and gives us more direction. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would, there's been a lot of questions tonight. We're still interested in comments too. So if you've got thoughts or input, please still share that and help us, continue to help us steer this. Please email or text or call the phone number on the screen. We still would like your input so we can kind of stay true to what you guys want in the new neighborhood here. With that, I will let you all get on with your evening. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight.